I'm looking way across the room over here at. There we go. Um, but I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of just open up and share quite a bit of information from our life's journey over the last 20 months. But to kind of give some context to this, many months ago, it's been well over 15 months. The Lord asked me to, you know, step away from a job that I've been at for over 10 years, and it wasn't an easy decision to make. It's very difficult, but when the Lord asks you to do something, He doesn't give you all the details. He just wants to see if you're going to trust Him and follow through in complete obedience. And so, I struggled there for a while, wondering, Lord, am I really hearing from you? A lot of the different things you go through as a human, and but ultimately, I eventually walked away from everything that I had known, and I was stepping out into the unknown waters with Him, not really knowing any of the details ahead of me. And much of what I have come to learn over the last 15, 15 to 20 months has slowly begun to really manifest, and then I see the hand of God in all of it. But this afternoon, I'm going to probably break this up into two, maybe three parts. Not really sure, but we'll see how this goes. But there's a message that the Lord gave me in a dream on Friday night, and I want to share this message. Now, I'm not going to give you a lot of details in the dream because that's not the main point. One of the main points of it is that there is unexpected provision and favor that God is releasing to His saints in this hour. And so, in this particular dream, there were a lot of things going on, and I knew that things that were happening that I was seeing spoke of, like I just mentioned, things that were unexpected, and they were given to me, and it's not just for me, but it's people that I am affiliated with, and it's a time frame that we're in, and there was favor, and there were gifts being given, and not just monetary things, because God has a lot of things reserved for this time frame that are not necessarily materialistic or financial in nature. And I think a lot of times we could easily miss out on the spiritual provisions that God's wanting to pour into our lives so that we can get to know Him in a deeper way. But after this dream on Friday night, one of the first things that I do when I get up in the mornings is I obviously I turn my alarm off, and then I get my phone and I start to just glance at any emails that have come through, and the first thing I do is I go through and I delete all the ones that I really don't need to, don't want or don't need to respond to, and then from there, I start to look at text messages, and after I've done that, then I get up and I go about my morning routine. What just so happens, after this dream that night, there were two emails in my inbox that were purchases from Apple that I did not make. And it's just like the enemy to try to take and steal, to kill or destroy something. And so initially I thought, well, it's just a hoax, it's spam. And I thought, well, I'm not going to pay any attention to it. But then the more that I looked at the email, both of them, I knew that they looked legitimate. So I continued on with my morning duties and got my breakfast, and I headed out the door. While I was pumping gas, I thought to myself, you know what, I need to check on that. So on the way into prayer that morning, it was the time that I was going into prayer. It's another thing that the enemy will try to do, is get you off track when you're headed to to begin to pray and intercede, He'll throw these things in your path. So I called Apple and I reported it, and they could see on their end that somebody had hacked into our account and was making purchases through Apple's online store. And so that started. I went into the sanctuary that morning at our church, and I started to pray a little bit, but my mind just began to. I was infuriated how somebody could hack into our bank account and steal money and impersonate me when it really wasn't me making those purchases. We've all been there, and it's very frustrating. 2 hours later, I still had not gotten all of it rectified. So I spent about 3 hours yesterday afternoon trying to, talk to Apple, talk to my bank. Had to cancel my debit card, get a new one. So I have to wait 5 to 7 days to get the new debit card in the mail. And so you just go through a lot of unnecessary things. But initially, when it happened, I started to declare that verse that Jesus said, the thief or the enemy's out to steal, kill, and destroy. But I started to proclaim that he's not going to steal, he's not going to destroy, and revenge. The revenge is the Lord's, and he's gonna repay the enemy for everything he's tried to steal. And so everything is kind of still in the making. One of the purchases has already been put back into our bank account. And so the dream, like I said, was all about unexpected provision and favor that was being given. And then immediately that morning, this happens. And so this weekend, my wife was supposed to be putting together a teaching for the class that we go to on Sunday mornings at our church, and she's come down sick with a cold, sore throat. So I stepped in and tried, help her out. And in the process of all of this, I started to begin to study the word suddenly in the New Testament. And I've done this before, but it's incredible what's in the scripture as it relates to this concept of how God did things in an unexpected manner, and it just surprised everybody around them, and there was favor upon his people and his church. And so I began to study the word suddenly, and it doesn't have a hidden meaning in the Greek language. In fact, it just really means, there's a couple of Greek words that mean something that happens suddenly or unexpectedly, or in another case, there's a word, it's aphno, and it means to be unaware of something, or it just happens in an unexpected manner. And that's really what happened. It's something that you can't forecast. It's unforeseen. It's just surprising. And this is the very thing that was happening in this dream. And the Bible is very clear about dreams representing the purpose of the Lord. And when God does reveal something in a dream, like he did with Joseph on behalf of his son, he said, get him out of this place because Herod's out to kill him. That dream spoke of the purpose of baby Jesus at that point. And so that's what dreams do. They speak of purpose. And I knew the dream was, I knew I had the interpretation. I knew that there were other individuals involved in this that were, they're working behind the scenes, even though you can't see them, or you don't know all the dynamics that are going on behind you in the unseen. But God is working all things out for the good of them that agape him and are really following hard after his eternal plan and purpose. And so as I begin to study this out, I just primarily looked at the New Testament. Now, I did take a look at the Old Testament really quickly this morning and kind of scan through, and there's a lot of different places where this principle of things happening unexpectedly is definitely a theme. But I just felt directed at this point to look at the New Testament. Now, I want to go through a series of steps in this first session here, kind of detailing some events that kind of led up to this. I'm going to rewind about 15 to 20 months ago, and as I briefly mentioned previously, I felt led of the Lord to kind of step away from my current employer. And as I began to do that, we had a little bit of money set aside. And after the first month, I was okay. Second month was great. Third month, we were okay. But then around, month 4 and 5, it started to get kind of really, really tough. And so you go through all the emotions of making a decision like this, even though the Lord directed you. You start to have negative thoughts of doubt, and the enemy tries to get in there and tries to really make you feel like somehow you've missed it or God's forsaken you. But all along the way, God would always lead me to scriptures and have these different types of visitations that would come along this pathway to let me know that he was with us no matter what it looked like or felt like in this physical realm that we live in every day. He was with us. And there were so many times in my thought process that I was really struggling to try to make sense of all of it, because it's one thing to say we need to trust the Lord in every situation. It's another thing to be in the midst of a situation that requires you to step into that type of trust. That's different. I know a lot of people that they can say that, but the bank account's full. They've got a home. They've got everything taken care of them. It's easy to say it during those times. The challenging part is when you don't have anything in the bank, when you don't know how to pay your next bill, those types of things, those are really where you find out who your source really is. And I know that, we say God is our source, and we know that to be true, but you really find that out during difficult and challenging times where you don't have anything but him to trust in. And those were times that I had walked through, and my wife and I had walked through this, and we knew that God was with us, and we knew that the decision that was made was correct. And he reminded me of Abraham. These are some of the first verses that he began to really open up to me and share with me how Abraham left the familiar. He left his own family. He was asked to do some things that seemed to be crazy in a natural sense, but God required that of him. And Abraham stepped out, and he did exactly what God said to do, even though, according to the book of Hebrews, he didn't know all the details. He didn't know what lied ahead of him. He didn't have an advanced copy, step by step, of how God was going to be doing this and God that. It wasn't that at all. And that's the same way it was with us, is he just required us to be obedient. And then as we begin to be obedient, then at every point along the pathway, he would give a life-giving word from his mouth, a rhema word from his mouth that would bring comfort, and that would help us know that we were aligned with him in his heart and in his perfect timing. And he did that over and over again. He really does know the thoughts that he has towards us. And they're thoughts of good and not evil. And he really does know every plan and every step of that plan. He knows the blueprints. He's the great architect of the individual plan for our lives and for the church. And he has the hardest part. It's like I said this morning in this teaching, everybody in the room, I was like, who's got the hardest job in this equation? Is it us or is it God? It's definitely God, but you know what? He's perfectly capable of fulfilling his role in every step of the way, and he's not going to lead us astray. His job is very, very difficult, but he can do it. Our job is to align ourselves with his voice and learn to hear his voice in the tumultuous times as well as in the good times. And so as I stepped out and I went through these months and months of looking for a new job, applying with every online job search company out there, from ZipRecruiter to Monster.com and every other company in between. Every door began to everything that I would do would close. And then when you thought one opportunity was going to open up, that one would close. And being that I worked in a school district for over 10 years, I was applying in all the independent school districts in Dallas and all over the Garland, all the major school districts. Had a few interviews, things seemed to go well, and then you wouldn't hear anything back, or you'd get a reply saying, sorry, but we've decided to go another route, or we've chosen another candidate. And at some point you start to think, okay, Lord, what's going on here? And then you start to try, doubt tries to creep in, going, well, Lord, did I really hear you? And I did, but it's just I'm just sharing with you the human side. To me, had a difficult time, and rightfully so. Any one of us would have difficulty walking through something like this. And I don't know what you're facing and what you've been through or what you might be going through at this point, but I know that God is able to do anything. He can change everything. He can do the impossible. And so he just wanted me to wait. He wanted me to really stick to it, don't back down, and really trust him. I learned so many different things over this 15-month, 20 months that I was in that situation. So much so I can't really go into great detail because it would take a long time. But so after and I'd been doing some things and had some sources of income. They were nowhere near what I was making when I'd left, but God was providing and doing things. And just out of nowhere, I got I'd applied for this position, and I got a call, and I spoke to the gentleman on the phone. Pardon that, I forgot to turn my phone off here. But I spoke to the gentleman on the phone and went in and had an interview, and everything went really well. It was with a technology company. And he said, I'll be in touch. And he called back in a reasonable amount of time. And basically, he told me on the phone, he said, we've elected to go with another candidate. He said, you've got great skills. He said, I would love to be able to hire you for this position. You're a great match. But he said, the only reason why you're not being offered this position is because it's covering the Fort Worth area, and you would have to be there most of the time. And I was willing to do that, and I even said that, but I didn't realize at the time that God was really looking out for me and my family, and even though I wanted to be able to, step back into the marketplace and say I would drive from Garland all the way to Fort Worth every day, um, it just was not going to be a good fit. And to be honest with you, I was very disappointed because it looked like a great opportunity. And I said, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to have the interview. And I said, well, I guess it just wasn't, you know, God's will that I be there. And he said, well, I wouldn't close the door on this yet. He said, because there might be something that comes open in a few months in the Dallas area. And he said, I don't expect you to be available because of your skills, but he said, I'll reach back out to you and see if you're available or not. So I said, okay, great. So I just continued doing what I knew the Lord had for me to do. And to make a long story short, he called back several months later, and I was still looking for employment. And he asked me if I was in the marketplace, and I said, absolutely. And so he said, the position that I mentioned in our last phone call is available for the Dallas area. Would you be interested to come in for an interview? And I said, absolutely. So I went in for the interview. Well, no, take that back. I didn't have to go in for the interview because I'd already been through it once. So that particular job was offered to me, and I accepted it in January of 2019. And now that's led me up to this time frame that I'm in now. And in this dream, so let me back up just for a minute. That just I'm laying out a sequence of events here. We don't need to worry or fret or just get discouraged. And God has everything in control. If you are someone that is walking in his eternal pathway and you're in his plan and you love the Lord, he's directing your steps. And sometimes, even when we don't even realize it and can become discouraged or disappointed or whatever, we need to know that God is working all things out for the good of those that agape him, those that are breathing hard after his purpose. And initially, I wasn't thinking in those terms. It's just like I was in survival mode. We were just doing what we had to do, and I'll be honest with you, I couldn't see the trees because of the forest. And all along the way, though, God was always there. He had never left us. He had never forsaken us. And we were doing our best not to forsake him. And so when the opportunity came to go to work there, I was ecstatic, and it's been great so far. In fact, this Friday, I got an offer to go into a new project with the company that I'm working for into artificial intelligence and being able to program. I'm going to be working with robots, hopefully pretty soon. It's kind of tentative, but working in different parts in the United States where I go in for like a week or two and then come back home. But this is some of the unexpected provisions. I didn't see this coming, and it came out of nowhere. There's going to be some financial provisions that come out of it as well. So that is there. There's been favor involved. And again, this just happened Friday afternoon at work, that I get this message. And then, or I find out about this opportunity that was totally unexpected. Then God gives a dream shortly after that about provision and about favor. And then the enemy, that next morning, that Saturday morning, tries to steal things, tries to steal the provision. And then I share this message about unexpected provision and favor coming forth in this season that we're all in. And it definitely is a season for this. And so I know I've shared a lot here in laying the foundation of this, but I think it's really important. You know, Jeremiah 29:11-12 says that Yahweh knows his thoughts towards us. And it's thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give us an expected end. And in his eternal plan, I know there's times where you won't fully understand what he's trying to do. We're all there. But I don't want you to be discouraged to the point where you start to look through different lenses, or you try to interpret things from a mere humanistic vantage point rather than allowing his Spirit to lead you into the meanings of what's going on. Now, another thing that's interesting about this time frame is all of this came in the 8th month of September. And according to the scripture, you know, in Genesis, in the first 7 days, God created everything and then he rested. And then the 8th day is a day of new beginnings. So in this month of new beginnings, there's this unexpected provision and favor that he's releasing to his people in an unprecedented manner. And just be encouraged. Don't give up, even though you want to give up. There were so many times where I was totally distraught in my mental capacity. I just had a rough time. And there were times where I would be headed over to the church to go and pray. I committed myself to go and intercede and pray in the mornings. And I knew as I did that spiritual provisions and visitations were going to be happening on a regular basis. I knew this because I felt the Spirit of God speaking to me about these things. And boy, they happen on a regular basis. And when I would go into praise, sometimes my mind would be so convoluted with good thoughts and then twisted thoughts that I was just overwhelmed by all of it, and rightfully so. But as I went in to pray and began to intercede in the Spirit, God really came down in a lot of different ways, and in my mind and in my spirit impacted me in such an incredible way that when I would walk out of that building, I was no longer worried about the cares of this life. I was no longer worried about finances. I was not worried. There was no anxiety, because his Spirit is perfect. And when he began to manifest himself in these ways inside me, it blew away all the garbage and the way that my mind had gotten convoluted. And so he transformed me on a regular basis during those time frames. And those are some of the most precious moments that I'll ever remember, that I hope that I never forget those times, because he really did do some incredible and supernatural things as I followed his leading. To be a son in the New Testament definition means it's someone that is learning to be led by his Spirit in everything we do and in everything that we say. That is a process, and it's exciting. Sometimes it doesn't feel good, depending on where you're at. But when you look at the life of a son in the life of the Son in the New Testament, the Spirit led him into the wilderness. For 40 days and 40 nights, he was fasting, hadn't had anything to eat or drink. And it was a time of major warfare, because the devil was allowed to come in and tempt him, and the enemy would try to get him to move away from his identity as a son. Because everything that he said to him, he said, if you are the son, you can do this. So he's attacking the perfect Son of God's identity. But we know Jesus did not succumb to any of the tactics of the enemy while he was in the wilderness, but he was led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness, into a place of desolation, into a dry place. And that just tells me that God's going to lead us into places, and he's going to lead us into experiences that are not always going to be like you're in a garden that's just flourishing. But just because we're in things like that, it doesn't mean it's God's sign that he's left us, or he's disapproving of where we are. That's not it at all. We have to have his heavenly perspective on where we are. And the way you find out what that is you have to get in his spirit and commune with him and pray in the Spirit, and he will give you the understandings like I'm sharing with you. And so I'm gonna wrap this part up, but we're gonna come back and I'm gonna do another teaching on this, and we're gonna begin to look at some scriptures that speak of this concept of unexpected provision and favor. So come back with me in this next teaching, and we'll dive deeper into this subject matter.